friends. I'm Karyn, and this is the Family Food for Moms podcast. We're talking about inspiration for family cooking and dining. I want to help you with the inspiration, the perspiration, and the celebration of food in your family. So often we only talk about the middle one of these, the perspiration. That's all the practical stuff, like we need to meal plan, do the shopping, cook the food, and serve meals to our family. But I think there's so much more that's significant about food in our families. So the inspiration, all the ways we can be inspired in our food making, and the celebration, all the ways that we can enjoy that time together and celebrate our togetherness and closeness. Those things are so important as well. So in this podcast, we talk about all three of those. Today, I want to talk about ways to save money in the kitchen. It's so easy to feel overwhelmed these days and a bit discouraged because everything is so expensive. And I want to feed my family healthy meals and delicious meals. So we're just going to talk about a few ways to save on money, save on time, and keep the health and the yumminess there. I know it's not easy, but we can do hard things, right? The more we practice hard things, the better we get at doing them. So the first one is to do with how much food you make. So I'm sure you've heard the advice to double up your meal, and if that works for you, that's great. If it's not too much extra work, doing a second meal is great because it usually uses less than double the ingredients. And then you've got two, it takes less time than next time, and you've saved some money by making what you have into two meals. The other slant of that is, I don't know about you, but I often overestimate how much food we need. We're a family of 7, and we have 2 hungry teenage boys. The girls don't eat as much, but the boys are kind of like bottomless pits. And I find I always make sure there's enough food, but often there is some left over, but not enough for another meal. So what I like to do, instead of just putting the bits into the fridge as leftovers, I've done that sometimes too, and then later in the week you grab all the leftover containers and everybody has a bit of that. But even more effective is making up freezer meals for individuals. I have a hubby and son who work from home a lot, but then do go out to clients sometimes, and then they take a lunch meal. So I have some small individual glass containers with lids, and I'll immediately grab one of those when there's some leftovers from dinner, and we'll make up an individual meal. So that'll be maybe a bit of rice, a bit of beef stroganoff or meatballs, and some butternut. So it's like a little meal ready to go that can be warmed up and eaten. And then I don't have to worry about what am I going to send for an individual meal? What am I going to buy that's extra that they can eat when they need that lunch? It's there in the freezer. So every day, usually I can make up one of those, at least one, sometimes more. Sometimes it's just meat left over, and then again, I'll put that in a small container in the freezer so that when I have extra veg on another occasion, I'll add it to that. And I find putting it in the freezer is better than the fridge because then it'll last longer and it's good to go whenever you want to take it out the freezer, but you can keep it for a couple of weeks or however long you need to. So making those freezer lunches is a great option. This also works for a mom at home like me who never knows what to eat and who sometimes maybe the children will be having sourdough bread and cold meat for lunch. And I don't want to have bread or can't have sometimes. Some people are gluten-free. So then a freezer meal would work great for me. I'll make some that are smaller than the ones for the men, but just a little bit of meat that's ready with some veg that I can just pull out the night before makes me eat better. Helps me to have something there, some high protein meal that is going to satisfy me, give me the energy that I need, and stop me from eating junk or what happens very often is not eating enough as a mom for lunch, not eating enough protein, not eating enough fiber, not eating enough calories overall, and not getting the nutrition that I need because I'm too busy helping everybody else. So slipping those bits of food into the freezer after dinner are so helpful. I often have to stop myself from jumping up during the meal to go and do it because I'm always thinking about it. I must go and put what's left in the freezer. But it's quite fine to do it at the end of the meal as long as the kids know that's what you're going to do with it. In terms of seconds, sometimes they do want seconds, but often I'll take out something like a full meal before they have seconds, and then there'll still be little bits of things to satisfy them so that we don't waste it. Because sometimes they'll eat the leftovers that are there, but they don't really want them. It's just because it's there and they don't really need them. Okay, next idea. These are just in random order. Let's jump to desserts. So if you decide to make a dessert once or twice for your family, or even if you buy one, instead of just using what is there, dessert is optional, right? And it's not where we get our main nutrition. It's just something nice at the end of a meal. So you get a dessert or you make a dessert. So immediately before you serve it, cut it in half and put the other half away in the freezer or the fridge if it can't be frozen. Because then everybody has a tiny bit of dessert, but it's satisfying, they still enjoy it, but then you've got some for next time and you've only used half. So that saves on the money when you want to buy one next time. We like to use cute, tiny dishes for dessert because then it's a small bowl and it doesn't feel like it's a tiny dessert, but it's sort of elegant and fun in the unusual shaped bowls. We've got tiny little triangular bowls. You can use ramekins. We've got little bowls that are shaped like fondue pots, little round ones with a handle. And those are such fun to have a mini dessert in. Another idea is to take your meal and think about it beforehand, and then possibly cut out one of the vegetables or divide the vegetables you're going to use between two meals. So the vegetables are important, but if you have, say, butternut and broccoli, then you could either just do the broccoli this time and do the butternut next time, or you could do half the butternut and half the broccoli, put the other part away in the fridge, possibly even cooked, then it's quick the next time, and then use half the amount of vegetables that you were going to. I know that the protein is usually the most expensive part, but I do find that the vegetables can add quite a lot as well if we're not careful. So if you're doing some kind of meat or some kind of casserole and you're putting away one, say you're doing two for 2 dinners, then you can do the same with your vegetables. Just split it, use half now and half next time. And everybody gets a little bit, but it doesn't have to be a huge amount, especially when money is tight. And then the next time you've got both your freezer meal and your vegetables ready to go. I find things like butternut, squash, broccoli, green beans, carrots, all of these things can be frozen just as easily as the meals. So you could use a big container and have your meat and your veg in it and your rice or whatever in the freezer. Or you could freeze it separately in its own little container. Or you could just put it in the fridge and have it with whatever meal you have the following day. I usually cook my vegetables in an electric steamer, which is wonderful because you can just leave them and they could take about an hour and they're lovely and soft. And then I'll just add some salt if I want to, or butter. But it makes it so easy. So if I was going to use half the vegetables the following day, I would steam everything, but I would take out half to put in the fridge when it's not quite done, so that the following day when I warm up the vegetables in the steamer by simply steaming them for 20 minutes, then they're going to be just right and not overcooked. And then I'll leave the other half in the steamer for the meal for that day. Number 4, I like to use bone broth in soups and in stews. It's delicious and it's very, very healthy. Obviously, it's very good for us. It's got good gelatin and collagen, all the things. So we want to nourish our family with things like that. Now, sometimes I would buy bone broth because I was desperate. And it's so expensive. I'm sure none of you do that. Perhaps you do. But it is so much cheaper to make your own bone broth. It goes so much further, and it's so delicious. I like to use it in a chicken noodle soup, or in a butternut squash soup, or a broccoli soup, a lamb stew, a beef stew, beef stroganoff, gravy for roast meat. So I'll put it in whenever I'm cooking those in the crock pot or the instant pot. We'll put some bone broth in the pot. So how do you make your own bone broth? It can be very intimidating, but I think it's more about timing, and then it's so easy. So whenever you do a roast, if it's a roast lamb leg, or if it's a roast chicken, or a roast beef with bone in it, it's so good to then use those bones immediately to make the bone broth. Some people put bones in the freezer and build up a collection as they can, which is also helpful, but I don't think I'm that organized that I could actually remember I have bones in the freezer and use them. So say we're doing roast chicken, I usually do 2 at once because we have a big family, but you could use one as a roast dinner and then shred the other for lunch the next day to go with bread and mayo, anything like that. So say you have 2 chickens and you cook them in the crock pot. Then after you've got the meat off the bone, you put the bones back into the crock pot. You add in bay leaves, some onion, some carrot, some pepper, some herbs like basil or oregano or parsley. And then apple cider vinegar helps to soften the bones. And then you just cover the bones with water and you leave it on low or on the lowest setting on your crock pot overnight. You can always turn it up again the next day, but I like to leave it as low as possible overnight. And then we just leave it until it's ready and it tastes good. And then when you've decided it looks good, it's been about 24 hours, you can drain the bones, you drain the broth, you add salt, and then you leave it to settle, and the fat will rise to the top, and you can scoop that off and keep your bone broth in the fridge in a jar. So it's very useful and very delicious to use after that. There's lots of ways that you can save money in your kitchen that I don't do. I choose not to use generic white flour or the cheapest kind of white sugar, the cheapest bread. Any of those things are void of nutrition and not worth my time. So I want my family to be healthy and have good food. So I'll look at the ingredients that are full of nutrients instead of the refined, very processed things. And I know that that does cost more in the end. But overall, your family will be healthier and they will be nourished and stronger, less doctor's bills, less doctor's visits, just lots of good stuff. So that's my strategy. Let's see, number 5, to save money in the kitchen. So this might be a controversial one, but for me it's to ditch the fake substitutes. That's something I'm quite passionate about. So fake substitutes are things that are not what they're called. So milk is milk. So it's not almond milk or rice milk or oat milk. It's milk. These things can be very expensive, and I do prefer to use raw milk. And even in recipes, sometimes I'll use water. So if I'm topping up something, water often works great. Sometimes it doesn't, but real milk does often work best. If you're definitely intolerant of dairy and you haven't been able to heal yet, I understand that you need some of these things. But I think often we just use them because we're told they're good for us and we buy them as an extra thing. And all the things in the health store in the middle aisles are usually so expensive and not worth our time. So real food works. Also, this applies to pre-packaged meals at the grocery store. We definitely need them sometimes. I agree. Sometimes we just don't manage to cook. And then I'll get a frozen lasagna or something like that. But to try and avoid this, as well as obviously fast food, is very important. Those things will eat up the money and the health. They're made with the cheapest, least nutritious ingredients, and they are expensive. So making things yourself at home is often much cheaper. If you do need a milk substitute, I believe personally that coconut milk and coconut cream are the best options. they're still high in protein and they've got lots of good nutrition. So fake meat, whatever it's made from, usually some kind of wheat substitute and soy, or fake milk, fake cheese, all these things are not great for our health and they're expensive. Again, I totally understand if you have to, if you're not able to eat those things. But if it's an option, then I would rather ditch it. The last tip I'm going to talk about today, and then we'll continue in a different episode, is whenever you have a meal or make a meal for your family, go for the highest nutrition possible in that meal. Now, this might sound counterintuitive if you are wanting to spend less, but you'll find that your family is much more nourished and fulfilled and satisfied and not as hungry if their meals are very nutrient dense. So if we have a good meat, a good protein, we have maybe sourdough bread instead of ordinary bread, or if we have a stone ground bread made from freshly ground grain, it's very much higher in nutrients and very much more satisfying. Then some good vegetables, some healthy rice. All of those things together will mean that your family is nourished and therefore less hungry, and they're not going to come into the kitchen every hour wanting a different snack. Our family has 3 meals a day, and for snack in the afternoon, we have Greek double thick yogurt with perhaps a bit of homemade granola, and that's their snack. It's plain yogurt, and it's very nutritious. Sometimes we'll add a bit of like a beef stick or a homemade muffin, but then they're nourished and they're not going to be wanting all the little snacks. So ditch the snacks, all the grocery snacks, even the ones that seem healthy, the snack bars or the packaged goods or little packages of crackers or meat, or those things are so expensive. So try to ditch those, because if your family is well nourished, we really don't need them. The other thing we have is fruit, obviously, and there's always a big fruit bowl with apples and citrus and pears and bananas and all the things in it, so they can grab those. But again, it's going to happen less because they're well nourished, they're good, they're satisfied, and they're not hungry, or their bodies are not craving that nutrition. So that's all for this time. I hope those gave you some inspiration. I'm certainly not perfect, and I definitely have used a lot of these things at times, and these are tips that I'm trying to apply in our lives, and I find it definitely helps with my budget. It's all the extras for me that add up, especially the snacks. And then we need dried fruit, and then we just need more and more if we're going to go for buying snacks from the grocery store. So have a blessed week, and I'll see you next time.